going to take you through a really quick, almost slapdash overview of 3 different visions to give you a sense of how this works. You don't need to know the philosophy behind it in order for this to be valuable. And lots of what I say will be oversimplification, but it should get the point across and it should help you learn how to work with these questions in your own discernment. So our 3 figures will be the 19th century British philosopher John Stuart Mill, who belonged to a school known as Utilitarianism. The 1st century Roman thinker Seneca the Younger, who was a member of the Stoic school of ancient philosophy. And the 20th century conservative Jewish rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. Let's run through what each of them has to say with respect to the agency question. What does it mean to lead life well? Well, for Mill, a good life is one that tends to increase the total amount of pleasure, good feeling of all sentient beings that it has any impact on, and to decrease their pain. So good actions are actions that increase pleasure or decrease pain. A good life is one that does that in the aggregate. And it's not just your own. This isn't an egoistic philosophy. Utilitarianism, as Mill says, means you have to care about everybody who experiences pleasure and pain. Seneca has a really different answer to this question. What does it mean to lead your life well? For him, it means to lead your life according to virtue, which is to say, in a sort of harmony or accordance with what reason and nature tell us. There's a sort of picture of what a human being is and how a rational human being would act. A good life is one that follows that pattern in whatever circumstances happen to arise. Heschel, for his part, is coming from within the Jewish tradition. And for him, a life led well can only be one that accords with the commands of God, that performs the acts that Jews have received as the law from God since Sinai. That's really different than what you get in Mill or in Seneca. And while a lot of the good works that they might do would overlap, the vision that they're knit into because of the different answers to these questions is a very different vision. Let's move on to circumstances now. For Mill, the answer here is going to seem fairly repetitive. Good circumstances are whatever increase pleasure or decrease pain. There are as many different good circumstances as there are people's preferences with respect to pleasure and pain. A good circumstance is whatever floats your boat. Seneca has a totally different answer here. Seneca says that the circumstances question, what does it mean for life to go well, is simply irrelevant to the question of the good life. It's not actually part of the question of what makes life worth living. Circumstances are outside of your control, and as he sees it, the good life ought to be fully within your control. You can't choose whether you wind up in prison or at a banquet table. All you can choose is how you respond to your situation, and that's all that matters for a good life. Heschel, for his part, has a pretty long list. It's not reducible like Mill to one thing, and it's very relevant, unlike for Seneca. The list would include things like a long life, health, community, education, things of that sort. And he has an account of how all of these things fit into what it means to be a creature of God. Turning now to the affect question, how does a good life feel? My hunch is that by this point, you can guess Mill's answer. A good life feels good. It has pleasure, and it has the absence of pain. That's it. Seneca has a bit of an answer here. Unlike for circumstances, it's not that there's nothing that matters, but it's a very reserved answer. He thinks that if you live a life of virtue, you'll feel something like the subtle, calm self-satisfaction of a job well done. And that's how a good life feels. Heschel, again, has a more dynamic and diverse set of answers here. He'll say things like joy. A good life is one in which the life of our community and what God has done for the world give us joy. It's also the case, though, that when faced with the immensity of the world, we ought to feel a sort of awe, a sort of wonder at the grandeur of everything and at the one who created it all. So a good life doesn't just feel joy, it also feels awe. And because not everything is going well all of the time, part of a good life is going to be to mourn and lament appropriately. So there's all sorts of different things that go into how a good life feels on Heschel's account of the good life. Now, this has been all at the content level. That's only one way that different visions differ with respect to their answers to these questions. There's also different ways of relating them. Here, I'll just take Seneca and Mill because they're the two easiest ones to show the answers here. So for Seneca, as I said, the good life is 100% the virtuous life. It's all a matter of agency. That's the only thing that counts. It's the only thing that really matters. And then circumstances are entirely irrelevant. And off to the side, it's not technically part of the good life, but it goes along with it as this kind of, this echo or this reflection in the form of the self-satisfaction and joy of being a virtuous person. Mill also has something he thinks is 100% of the good life. That's feeling good and not feeling bad. But for Mill, he has an account of how agency and circumstances relate to this that's really different from Seneca. Because there's not just the good life, there's the moral life, which is a life that contributes to the good life for self and others, that increases pleasure and decreases pain. And because we don't act directly on each other's feelings, we act via mediations, by doing things, saying things, by changing other people's circumstances. Circumstances play a mediating role here. We act on circumstances so as to bring about feeling. And that's a really different relation than just excluding circumstances entirely. So, to summarize, if you ask these three questions, you get a pretty comprehensive account of a good life or a life worth living. But you need to pay attention to both the content of the answers and how they relate to each other, because it's very easy to wind up with an incoherent view with answers where we're picking and choosing and they don't fit together in the way that somebody like Seneca or Mill's answers do fit together, whether or not we agree with them ourselves.